Hi friends, today I have 10 upcycled projects for you. I will add some vintage items with them to create a summer vignette in my booth. The theme for this display will be Rose Moss Garden, inspired by these beautiful pieces given to me by a friend. Project number 1. We will repurpose photo frames into beautiful moss wreaths. Materials and tools that I used are a glue gun and glue sticks, frames with the glass removed, a bag of reindeer moss, a screwdriver, a pair of needle nose pliers, and faux florals and greenery from a thrifted wreath. Step 1. Remove the glass mounts, and any hooks on the back of the frame. You can leave the hook on if you plan on hanging the wreath on the wall. Step 2. You will want to cover your workspace or do this next part outside. Start pulling reindeer moss out of the bag while twisting a small piece about 1 inch wide. Twisting will help keep the strands together, which makes it easier to glue onto the frame. The length of the piece that you want will depend on the size of your frame and how much you want to work with. The moss tears easily, or you can cut it using scissors or a knife. Step 3. Working in small sections at a time, apply hot glue to one corner of the frame. Press the moss firmly onto the hot glue and hold it in place. Use caution. The piece of moss you're working with is thick, but hot glue may still seep through, so be sure to protect your fingers. Continue hot gluing the moss around the frame. A heads up, the reindeer moss will leave your fingertips green like grass, but it washes off easily with soap and water. Step 4. Fill in any bare spots on the front of the frame and repeat steps 2 and 3 on the sides of the frame. If you choose to hang your frame on the wall, I recommend not adding moss to the back. It might stain your wall over time and your frame will be too bulky and not lay flat. I created my wreaths as shelf sitters and bowl fillers to add texture and a look of nature to my booth. I applied moss to the back, thinking someone might want to use them the same way in their home. Step 5. Now it's time to add florals, greenery, or any embellishments that you want. I purchased this wreath at a thrift store for a few dollars. I've used parts of it on previous projects, and even after this one, I'll still have a little bit more left. So it definitely saved me money versus buying it new in the store. I cut the roses, placed them in the center of the frame where I wanted them, and applied hot glue to the leaves to hold them in place. If using a larger frame, you could add flowers to a corner or along the edges. Please let me know, what would you use to embellish these wreaths, and how would you style them in your home? Project number 2. We will repurpose the chair spindles left over from last week's video. Materials and tools for this project are 3 wooden chair spindles, green and gray paint, white wax, water, paintbrushes, a wax candle, ink stamps, ribbon, a piece of paper, twine, and some faux florals. Step 1. Paint the spindles with your base color and let them dry. Step 2. Take a candle and rub wax onto the spindle. My goal is to create a few layers of color and texture. It's the first time I've tried this, so let me know if you have any suggestions. I think I missed something. Even though I was happy with the final look, I would have liked it to be a bit more chippy. Step 3. Brush a lighter color of paint over the entire spindle, right on top of the wax. While the paint is still wet, take a small paper towel or cloth and wipe back the excess paint off of the spindle. Be gentle so you don't remove the wax yet. You can use a blotting motion with the paper towel to create more texture. Set it aside to let it dry and repeat the process with the other 2 spindles. Step 4, using a crumpled piece of paper or a credit card, run it over the top of the wax and remove it in the areas that you want darker. Step 5, I applied ink to a few ink stamps from the Rose 12 set from IOD. I found it easier to lay the stamps down face up and then roll the spindle up over the top of them. Just be sure to have the right ink going the same way. I made that mistake twice with this project because I got going too fast. The spindles are curved, so you have to tilt the spindle and press down onto the ink stamp to get the ink to transfer onto both ends. Step 6, to add one more layer of texture and fade the ink to give it an aged look, I applied white wax over the top and then wiped it back. Our final step is to add any embellishments that you choose. I'm using twine, a small piece of lace ribbon, and 3 roses with some greenery. I'm going to attach them using some hot glue, and then this project is a wrap. Project number 3, vintage inspired clay pots. Using rub-on transfers from Redesign, vintage labels too, you can purchase them along with any Dixie Belle product by clicking on the link to the hive located in the description box below. Step 1, cut around the transfer, peel off the paper backing, and apply the transfer onto the flower pot. Repeat this step onto the other 2 flower pots. Head to step 2 if you'd like to age the pots by grabbing some water, white and green paint, and a brush. Add some water and white paint in a dish and stir it well. Dip the brush into the watered down paint mixture and then brush it along the rim of the pot, letting it drip down the pot by pressing the brush firmly to release a little bit more paint where you want. I made a mistake and was way too heavy-handed with this step and applied it too evenly, and it ended up looking like stripes, which I didn't really care for. Taking a sponge brush, try to take some of that wet paint from the drips and spread it around, and then use some additional paint from the dish and add paint any place that you want. The final step is use a little bit of that green paint to dab on along the edges and a little here and there to add a bit of age to the pot. I decided in the end that the label was kind of standing out a little bit too much, so I did apply some white paint onto the sponge brush and then just wipe it back with a cloth. Project number 4, we will make a cute piece of decor for the kitchen using a potato masher and a mini tart cup. Materials and tools that I used: hot glue, some Spanish moss and reindeer moss, a few pieces of faux florals, and a small jute bow. You can add any type of embellishments that you want. I think another option would have been just to put a larger flower right in the center and leave that as is. And in the last minute, I decided that I was going to make a little mini bird's nest out of it. So I added a couple faux eggs, and I did apply a little hot glue onto the bottom of the tart cup, but somebody could easily remove it if they choose to display those pieces separate. Let me know what you guys think about this project. All right, this is a super quick, easy project. I picked this metal, I'm going to call it like a plant hanger, up at a thrift store. It was missing the hook on the end, so I added one on there. It does have a little bit of wear and just a tiny amount of rust on the base, but I didn't want to change that. I was inspired when I took these photos. I love the look of the doily, but that's my personal piece and I don't want to sell that. So I wanted to put a stencil in the center. I wish that this one would have been bigger. I do like the way that it came out, but I decided that I'm going to go over to stencilsmith.com. They have these flower blooms available in 3 different sizes and in 2 different grades. I absolutely love their stencils and I highly recommend them. And if you use the link below or the coupon code, you're going to save 15% off your order. Project number 6, we're going to take some coffee filters and make some roses. I used 8 to 10 coffee filters and laid them flat, one on top of the other. Folded them over 3 times. Press the edges firmly and then cut the top in a curved shape. You'll probably only want to cut 4 or 5 coffee filters at a time. Otherwise, it might be a little too thick for your scissors. And you'll unfold each of them. You'll need a glue stick, and I used a small canning jar. I think those are jelly jars, but you can use any size jar or cup that you want. And then right along the center part of the coffee filter, wrap that around the rim of the glass. Apply glue stick all the way around, and then get your next coffee filter out and repeat that process all the way around the cup. After you've added about 8 coffee filters, I would recommend taking it off of the cup and looking at it to see if you'd like to add more. I decided on this one that I wanted to add 2 more, so that way it would be nice and full. And the last step that I did here was to fold the edges over and shape the flower any way that you want to. This was my first attempt at making these. If you can give me any tips or tricks, if you've tried it before, I'd appreciate it. And I think next time I want to add some color to them. Project number 7, we're going to do another bird's nest, and this time we're going to add a little bird to it. First thing I'm going to do is prep this guy to paint him. He's got a lot of glitter on him, and I'm removing some plastic pieces off the top where he was hung, and then I don't know what he had on the bottom, but we're going to remove that. And then any excess glitter I'm going to try to brush off. I do end up getting all of the glitter off of his tail. I made a baking soda paint mixture. That's going to give the whole piece texture and get rid of the shininess. Then I'm going to get in with some white wax and then taking a cloth and wiping back any extra wax. I found this mini pan out in my stash. It was painted white and had gilding wax around the top. Added some Spanish moss and some reindeer moss to the center with some hot glue. And then using a lot of hot glue, I'm going to adhere that bird right into the center of his new nest. I added a mini rose and some of the greenery left over from that wreath. I added a little white wax to the green leaves because they were a little too bright, and that helped to tone them down. I decided to go on my stash and see if I could find a candlestick holder to place that on. And I found one that, my gosh, I think I did that thing like 2 years ago. I'm going to apply a coat of white wax all over the entire candlestick holder, wipe that back. Using my knife, I scrape the paint off the top of the candlestick holder because I want to make sure that it's going to stick well to the bottom of that pan. Had I known that I'd add a candlestick holder, I definitely would have added the things inside the pan first, so that way I could have turned it upside down to let it dry. But I did end up stabilizing the little bundt pan, and it came out just fine. I did take a brush with some copper gilding wax from Dixie Belle and apply that on the edges of the candlestick so that way it would match the little pan. Project number 8, we're going to give this flower pot a unique makeover. Had a lot of surface scratches on it. So the first step is we're going to make a clay mold, and then we're going to paint it, add some gilding wax, and add some white wax. I like to brush cornstarch inside of the mold. I think that it helps so that the clay doesn't stick. And then fill the mold with some air dry clay and use a rolling pin to flatten the bottom. I do place the mold in the freezer for a few minutes. I think that it makes it much easier to actually remove the clay mold all in one piece. Have you tried that before, or what are your tips in getting the mold to come out in one piece? Taking a wet paintbrush, I like to go along the edges and on the top and smooth out any areas that are rough. Then picking up the mold, I do the same thing going along the bottom edge. While the clay mold is still wet, I like to apply E6000 on the back and glue it right onto the surface. As soon as I get the clay mold even, I take that same wet paintbrush and press along the edge of the mold down onto the surface. Because this flower pot is a very shiny surface, I'm going to apply 2 coats of Bonding Boss to ensure that the paint adheres properly. I love this color green. It was a mixture that I did in last week's video of 2 Dixie Belle paints. I believe that it was Acadia, which is a silk paint, and Sawmill Gravy mixed together. I applied 2 coats, letting them dry in between each coat. All right, so I did start applying white wax from DIY and a little bit of copper gilding wax from Dixie Belle onto the clay mold. I'll be applying several layers of both waxes and wiping them back. I want to create a textured vintage look. I applied a light coat of white wax with a brush and then wiped it back using a cloth. And for the final step, I applied some white wax onto the paintbrush and went right around the edge of the mold, and that completed this piece. Project number 9. I think that this picture from Home Interiors is so beautiful, but I felt that the frame was a little cheap looking, and I want to apply the same technique that I did to the flower pot onto this frame. The first step was to apply 2 coats of the Bonding Boss, which I used as a primer. Then applied 2 coats of that apple barrel paint, and that color is granite gray. And this is what that color looks like close up. And now the next step will be applying white wax over the entire frame and adding some copper gilding wax from Dixie Belle to bring out even more texture. I noticed it is a little hard to tell in the photos and in the video. I think in person it ended up having a lot more texture. Our final project is quick and easy. I had this little straw hat. I actually think I purchased it from the Dollar Tree a few years back. I thought that if I added some roses and a little bit of greenery, it would be perfect for this garden theme. I applied them using a generous amount of hot glue and held them in place for a while to make sure that they were stuck on there well. You guys will have to tell me which of these projects was your favorite and share with me what would you have done differently. So here's a peek at what the items look like in this section of my booth. Unfortunately, it's really hard to get far away shots because I have a see-through grid wall in each of my vignettes. And you can actually, on this one, see the checkout counter. So I have to kind of get close-up shots. But I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you have a super blessed week.